Right, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started, go over some things. So I hope everyone's having a good week so far up to this point. I appreciate your flexibility in switching nights for me. I had an event scheduled several months ago that fell on this week's scheduled Zoom evening, so I appreciate that. So we're looking at in the course shell, if you look at week number 2, this is a PowerPoint I'd like to share with you, just kind of go over. It's got some good information in it. There's actually multiple PowerPoints for week 2. There's also a PowerPoint over chapters 3 and 4. Gets into a little bit of more detailed specifics on testing, some terminology, but I wanted to take a few minutes to share this one with you, and then we will talk a little bit about your group project that's coming up this Sunday, and then we'll get into a little bit about informal assessment as well. So we're looking at different assessments in special education. And so we basically just kind of has some simple definitions for us of what assessment is. It's a process that basically collecting information about a student for the purpose of making decisions. Also, you refer to this as data-driven decisions. And so it's a primarily a problem-solving process. So when we talk about informal assessments, that's just some real simple, short snapshots of how that student is performing to kind of determine some various strengths and weaknesses on whether we need to progress forward to implement some additional data collection methods. So that's pretty much the process of assessment. So sometimes assessment and testing are often used together, and they're really not the same. Testing is just one piece of the assessment process when we get into looking at it. So no matter what type of professional you end up becoming in special education, whether it's a special education teacher, school psychologist, school psychometrist, it's really necessary to kind of understand how the assessment process works so you're able to communicate that information to other individuals that you're working with, and also the parents as part of the IEP team. Most of you know this term, the multidisciplinary team, often referred to as the IEP team. So basically you're going to work with many different professionals in the field. And I mentioned this the first night, kind of went over when I went over the assignments. And why we implement some of the group projects is to get you accustomed to working with a variety of individuals and learning how to work with them. So you're part of that team, often referred to as a multidisciplinary team. Basically, it's performing the assessments for a child of suspected disabilities to determine eligibility for services. So we're just collecting various forms of data, bringing it into the team, and then we also do some formal assessments, which is to see if that student qualifies for services. The team's role, as you guys well know, if you've been involved in that up to this point, it's very crucial because it helps determine the extent of services or what direction that child's journey is going to go in through special education, whether they're going to receive services, or if they don't qualify, what type of services can be provided to help that student be successful throughout their school experience. Consequently, skills you must possess in order to offer a child must be global, accurate, practical in the evaluation sense, so they're fully understood. Decision making. So as you guys well know, some of your experiences, we don't just send in a referral and the child is placed in special education class. Okay, there is a process that has to work through in order to determine eligibility for services. And so we, first of all, want to look at evaluation decisions. So that's when we're collecting the information in the assessment process. It's going to provide detailed information regarding strengths, weaknesses, overall progress. Again, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, the very beginning phase of that could be administering just some informal assessments, just some things that are really quick, just to give you a really fast idea of how that student's doing. Then we have diagnostic decisions. That's information that's collected throughout the assessment process that can provide a lot of detailed information of the specific nature of the student's problems or disabilities. So this is when we get into a little bit in-depth testing, more formalized. I mentioned a lot of times we use the WJ4, Woodcock-Johnson 4th edition. And so it has for cognitive and achievement, each one of those assessment batteries will have 10 subtests. So it provides a lot of information, specific skill sets, and gives you detailed information about how that student is performing. We have eligibility decisions. So it's information that's all collected, compiled, it's processed, it's condensed into a lot of detailed information on whether that child is going to be eligible for services. And so when that happens, that's when the school psychometrist or the psychologist is doing the MEAGS meeting, and they're going over the comprehensive assessment results. Has anybody had that experience of sitting in a MEAGS meeting where they go over the comprehensive results of the testing process? Has anybody had that experience yet? Okay. So I think I might have mentioned this the first night, just giving you an overview. When that happens, when you walk into a MEAGS meeting, you're going to see the school psych or the psychometrist, and that may be the first time that you see that individual. And they're going to be sitting in there with a detailed report that may be anywhere from 12 upward to 15, could be up to 20 pages long, with a lot of detailed information and data within that. And they're going to go over and explain the results of each subtest that they had administered. And then they're going to get into talking about standard deviations, standard scores, and looking at their overall scoring process to see if there's enough discrepancy in the scores. So when you see the results of the test, it's going to show where that student should be scoring based on their overall intellectual ability, that score, compared to how they actually scored on each subtest for those skills. And it's going to cross-reference those. And if you have a wide enough discrepancy, that's when you start looking, and those are red flags when you have such a discrepancy that's an indicator that there is some severe weaknesses and that child's going to end up qualifying for services. Okay. You may have some that you set in that there's not a big enough discrepancy. And you think, how can that be? This child's really struggling through class, but yet the detailed formalized assessment that has been provided shows that there's not a significant discrepancy enough to qualify for services. That does happen. Not everyone that's tested is going to qualify for services. So you need to understand that. Once it's determined whether there is enough discrepancies that they're going to qualify for that service, and depending what test was giving and what category of service you're looking at or categorization, then the IEP development decisions and process will take place. And that's when it's determined, yes, the child qualifies, and we're going to move forward and write the individual plan. And so information is collected in the assessment process. It provides enough detailed information once you review the results that you can start laying a plan for that individual child, for you guys, for the teachers, and whether it's regular classroom or the learning lab to follow. Placement decisions, that's when it's yes, we want to place this child, no, we don't. Okay. Has anybody ever ran into or heard of experiences in your district where the parents refuse services? Yeah, see Jamie and Alicia, yeah, shaking your head. And sometimes you don't understand why they refuse that service when you know you're working with that student good and well that they need that service. Sometimes it could be a denial, could be multiple reasons. Jamie, you or Alicia, did they give you any specific reason on that you want to share?
They just deny that the kid needs it. They think their kid is fine. And sometimes we'll just end up giving them accommodations anyway, so it
Yeah.
ends up okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can still do that. You can do some accommodations within, even though they don't have a specific plan. You have a little bit of flexibility there. So, Alicia, was your experience pretty similar to Jamie's, or was it something?
Yes, it was very similar. They were just in denial that there
Yeah.
was anything that their child needed extra. So like Jamie said, we just kind of make the accommodations anyway, because that's what the kiddo needs.
Yeah. So the longer you're in this, you'll run into that through your experiences, where they just flat out are in denial, and you're sitting here pulling your hair out thinking, how can they not see this? Sometimes I don't know if it's a pride thing. I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot of different reasons. Even in these meetings, sometimes they get really emotional, especially the MEAGS meeting, when you come in, the examiner, and we're going over the results, and we've got some that are extremely low. I mean, severely low, and trying to convey that information to the parent in a manner in which they understand the significance of how low they are. And then when you also have to talk about what category you're looking at that they're going to qualify under, whether it's ID as intellectually disabled, which those are hard conversations to have. So another thing to be prepared for, you have to be real considerate of that family as well, and try to convey that information as well as you can to where they understand, and also knowing it's going to be a sensitive conversation as well. And then we get into the next thing is basically the instructional planning. And both of you ladies mentioned that, hey, they refuse services, but we can still do some things on the side, even though we don't really technically have the plan, because we know it's what's in the best interest for the student. So here it just talks about the categories under IDA, Public Law 108-446, a federal law, and has 13 categories of disabilities, which are listed. So there's a plethora of those categories. I think I mentioned maybe the first night. One thing that's interesting is if you look at the category of emotionally disturbed, has anybody really ever looked at that for ED category? So if you look at it, there's 5 criteria for that category, and the criteria is very broad, extremely broad. So literally, if you as an adult were to look at it, or myself or anyone, you're thinking, hey, in any normal day, I'll probably experience 2 of these, 2 of the 5. I mean, because they're just so broad, really, they are. And then if you go and compare and look at, I don't know if your districts have done a lot of trauma-informed professional development. When you talk about ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences, and you look at those ACE scores and go through there and rate it, I mean, those are very, very extensive. You look at that, and then you compare it back to the 5 criteria for emotionally disturbed, and it doesn't make sense. We're using those 5 broad categories to categorize a student that we know we could experience on any given day compared to the ACE score. So it's kind of interesting when you lay them down side by side. I would challenge you to do that moving forward and just kind of look at the comparison on it. And I'm sure you have a lot of children with a significant ACE score as well. If you look at the statistics on it, I think if they meet a minimum of 4, it talks about the statistics, basically the odds that are stacked against those students if they identify with a minimum of 4. So that's another interesting thing for you to look at, especially working with students in special education. Here are the categories under IDEA that it just mentioned. So you have autism, deaf, blindness, developmentally delayed, and that's a lot of times we use that when they're younger until they get around that 10 years old. I mentioned emotional disturbance, ED category, hearing impaired, including deafness. Actually, this is an older slide. It has no longer used the MR term. That's ID, intellectually disabled now. Then we have multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, OHI. Sometimes it's used depending on if you get into a situation where maybe achievement in cognitive, looking at those areas where they don't meet the criteria to qualify on, but they've got some other outliers that you qualify on under OHI. So that's another category to look at. Then you have specific learning disabilities, speech and language impairment, traumatic brain injury, and then visual impairment. Anybody ever worked with a student with TBI, traumatic brain? So if you knew the student before and then after, I mean, you see a lot of complete changes in personality and behaviors and the individuals. So it's kind of interesting to observe that, especially if you were around the student prior to, especially if they were involved in an accident. And then, after, they go through the accident, the healing process, and you transition them back in, just seeing the extreme differences in personality changes, mood swings, it's almost just like a completely different student. So normally 3 ways, identifying for assessment for suspected disability. A lot of times it could come and be initiated from the classroom teacher after they've done some informal assessment, looking at just some of their work, or if they're working up to expectations. Students' parents may call and express some concerns based on things they're seeing at home, and also seeing the child's graded work coming home, or various information they might be receiving from the classroom teacher. And then the other is, it could be referred by or initiated by their school personnel as well, that may see some things going on, especially if it's a behavioral thing. Some of the other specialty teachers or secondary teachers, maybe they're teaching some of the elective courses they may have. They're seeing a lot of behavioral issues. That could be a sign that there could be some things going on emotionally. And so you may have a PE teacher or coach initiate that conversation. Okay, so a couple things here to note. Under IDA guidelines, evaluation of a child with that suspected disability must be done under the guidance of the multidisciplinary team. You're going to have a variety of professionals involved collecting data even before you get to that testing phase. So remember that it is a process. Okay, could involve your regular ed teacher, a school psych, or educational evaluator, whoever's qualified tester, special education teacher, speech and language pathologist, could have medical personnel when it's deemed appropriate, social worker, school counselor, parents, nurse, occupational physical therapist. So that's not uncommon to walk in, especially depending on the severity of disabilities that you're suspecting. And if that child's already receiving some outside services, it's not uncommon for the parents to request them to come in, be a part of that conversation, or to provide information for you. Okay, other components of the test is the psychological evaluations. That could include your general intelligence, general intellectual ability. GIA is how it's categorized on the WJ4. It talks a little bit about instructional needs, strengths and weaknesses, and also social emotional dynamics. It will include information on social and academic history, getting information from parents, having them fill out the rating skills, maybe some physical examinations for hearing, vision, health, and also classroom observations. Okay, observations in the classroom and other settings could be PE, could be observing them interacting with peers out on the playground to see how their social skills are, how they cope emotionally when they're challenged. Also, it just gets, you're able to see some spontaneous behavior. Disadvantages in this process is you have no control over the situations when you're just doing those observations, especially in those environments outside the classroom. And then also a disadvantage is observer biases. which we get into testing bias and things like that later on. So could be errors that are recorded from the observer, just general impressions, misconstrued, or how the observer perceives them. Those are just some examples of bias. Okay, some observational techniques could be just various types of recordings, documenting. You also have video recordings, could be part of that, event recording, tally sheets, duration recordings. Those are all acceptable ways to document. And then also ecological assessment, observing how that child interacts in various environments. Okay. Could be interviews as well, structured or unstructured. Advantages of the interview: you get a personal side, and you get to know a little bit about the emotional side, and then also you have a lot of flexibility within doing that interview. Could use some portfolios as well. So just kind of want to briefly go over that. It provides a lot of good basic information on assessment and kind of how that process works if you've never been involved with it. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to share that with you. Let's talk a little bit about, real quick, your group interview project. Is everyone doing all right on that? Able to communicate with your team members, progressing along, or is there anything we need to talk about or questions I need to answer for you? Everybody's just looking there like it's crickets. I hear crickets.
I'll admit that I haven't done mine yet, but
Okay.
my guy was sick, so.
Okay. Did your group members, you able to connect and maybe use a shared
We did.
document to help? Okay, that's really a great way to stay connected, and you can kind of see what each other is doing. So has anyone else ran into their individual maybe being out sick? I know I hear different ones talk about COVID starting to maybe spike up again, or even flu already. It's crazy that we're in August and already seeing the flu, but some other ones having issues with theirs. If they're still out, you see it's going to delay your group a little bit, shoot me an email. I'll work with you on that. Okay, if you need an extra day or two to get that information together, especially if a couple of you in the group have individuals that are sick and it's really putting you behind. Okay, but just make sure you email me in advance. So everyone's good with that before I move on to the informal and just kind of update you on it. Okay, so already looking ahead, as I mentioned the first night, you're no more going to be toward the end of finishing one project, and we're going to start rolling right into another one. So again, don't panic, don't stress. I'm just kind of wanting to prep you so you can kind of know how to move forward. So I wanted to make sure, first of all, that in the course shell under SPED 805 resources, you were able to see some of the sample assessment reports, kind of how they're laid out, some of the information, how it's presented. Were you able to find that? There's multiple examples in there. If you go into SPED 805 resources, you'll see a sample informal assessment report. You'll see sample norm reference report, samples CBM. Okay. If you follow that format and lay it out like that and make sure you cover the information in the rubric that's listed, you're going to be fine. So just try to follow those formats, put plenty of examples in there for you to look at. Okay. If you'll notice, and I mentioned the first night, most of the rubrics for each one of those reports, the highest percentage of points comes from the section that asks you to present data in tables, charts, and graphs and explain it. That's where the highest percentage of points for each one of those assignments will come from. Okay, so make sure that you cover that area on the rubric. Now, as you move forward, hopefully you already have your student lined out. I had a few email me. It's like, hey, I'm running into problems. I'm in a gen ed room. I've got this challenge and that challenge. And my response to you is, if you have a family friend that has a child that's school age, you can use them. If you have a neighbor that has a kid, talk to them, ask them if you can use them. If you have a relative that maybe is outside of your district, you can even conduct it using Zoom. Okay, it doesn't have to be just face to face. You can do it using Zoom if you need to. Okay, so there's various options there. If you are having trouble finding a student, is everyone good as far as finding their student they're going to work with? Yeah. Okay. So informal assessment. What is it? I told you the first night, it's pretty much wide open. Anything that you can do quickly that will just take you 1 to 2 minutes max to collect information. It could be something as simple as doing a little exit ticket. If you are teaching math or a science concept, whatever it is, and you want to do a little exit tickets, like, hey, I need you guys to jot down 3 things that you learned from this lesson, or whatever information you're looking for. So exit ticket, that's one, that's a common one, or a short 3-4 sentence short response. It could be something that's a 5-question true or false, quick, just something that's quick that you can collect some information to see, is Johnny getting the concepts that I'm presenting, or is Susie grasping that? Okay. And then after you do that, I believe in the rubric, it asks you to use, is it 3 different ones? I'm going off the top of my head here. I don't have the information right in front of me, but I think it asks you to use multiple informal assessments for that of your choice. So you'll do that and collect the information, and then you're just going to present that within the report. And also you're going to convert it into and display it in a table, chart, or graph. Okay, the results that you get. Okay, again, remember this very first informal assessment report is going to be, the graphs, charts, and tables are going to be very basic, because you're just collecting quick information to just give you an idea whether they understand the concept. Okay. Is there any question over that?
Yeah, I have a question. I work with preschool, and my classroom is split 8 and 8, with 8 typically developing and 8 special ed kiddos.
Mhm.
And so for them, could I use like a developmental checklist,
Yeah,
or
you can.
something as simple as colors and shapes and
Exactly.
anecdotal notes, stuff like that?
You're exactly right. You're on the right track. Yeah. Okay. Any other question I could answer? No, everyone's good. Okay, so remember, this Sunday at midnight will be the group project. Okay, that'll be due. If you are, again, if you have trouble due to your individual being sick, you need a couple extra days, shoot me an email and let me know. All right. Unless I hear from you, I'll plan on your group having theirs in on Sunday night. And then you might start from tonight moving forward, start thinking about, hey, what informal assessments do I want to use? So you'll have those prepped and ready to go. And you can do those even starting before the end of this week if you want. If you already have an idea, and go ahead and start getting some information and data, and just try to stay ahead of schedule a little bit. Okay. So you can actually go ahead and start collecting that if you know which ones you want to use. All right. Everyone good? Jamie, feel good about it? Marcy, everyone? Okay. All right. Well, guys, thank you again for your flexibility and changing nights this week. I do appreciate it. We'll be back on regular schedule moving forward next week. So if you think of anything after we finish up this evening, just email me and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good evening. See you. Bye-bye.